Hi and welcome to MTG CubeTube. I'm Sjoerd Willems and this is the first video of my new YouTube channel for everything about Cube in Magic the Gathering. I would love to start this first episode with a proper introduction to myself, my general thoughts about Cube and maybe the mission statement of this channel, but now is not the time for that because we have a new Magic set to discuss, Guilds of Ravnica. A new set is just an awesome trigger for a large Cube overhaul because it's exciting to see many new cards in action in the context of Cube. This overhaul is largely temporary in my case, but after the Cube reverts back to normal, I'm sure that some of the new cards will remain and find a permanent or semi-permanent home. Guilds of Ravnica is just full of cool cards for all kinds of cubes. And since Guilds is all about multicolor, and about 5 guilds in particular, I thought it would be fun to drastically up the number of 2-color cards for those 5 guilds, and slightly lower the number of 2-color cards for the other combinations, but resulting in an overall increase in multicolor cards, mostly at the expense of colorless cards. I also wanted the highlighted guilds to have better mana fixing, and I did that by removing the bounce lands for the non-represented guilds. I replaced them with the less guild-specific Vivid lands. By adding the 5 guild signets at the expense of some inferior mana rocks, and by adding a land for each guild from a cycle that wasn't in a cube yet. And, well, Celestia hit the jackpot here because Horizon Canopy is just an amazing card. In this video I will cover all the multicolor cards that I added for Izzet, Boros, Dimir and Celestia, and in my next video I will go over Golgari and the monocolored cards I added, as well as give a few examples that illustrate how you can easily add cards to a cube, either by playing it safe and not breaking the integrity of the cube overall, or by introducing something new, like a card that is a bit of a build around and creating a small extra package around it when adding it to the cube. But without further ado, let's first dive into the new cards, and we will start with Izzet. My cube is very much what you might call a good stuff cube. So the cards I'm looking to add are mainly the most powerful and efficient ones, but I'm even more on the lookout for cards that are cool to build around, that unlock new strategies, or that have the most fun gameplay. And Izzet really delivers. The new Niv-Mizzet, for starters, is fantastic. Cannot Be Counted is great for a 6-mana creature, and getting back a card almost every time an opponent even tries to remove him makes him much better than his previous incarnations. And if they don't kill him, then in the right deck the cards will just keep flowing. He's hard to cast, and cards like Mana Drain and Soul Ring and other unfair stuff don't help getting him out early, so you have to be dedicated to Izzet, but he's just the type of top end that a deck full of red and blue instants and sorceries wants anyway. Blue-red already had a light spells matter theme in my cube, but it lacked really good payoffs, and Niv-Mizzet fixes that all by itself. Ral is a typical 5-mana planeswalker. Plus to draw, minus to kill, and an ultimate that wins the game. That makes him a bit generic and replaceable, but in the as many cards from the new set version of the cube, he serves a good purpose. He's probably one of those cards that I will rotate in and out of the cube in the future without feeling very strongly about it either way. Crackling Drake is another card that helps the spells matter theme of blue and red. I have never really considered adding the various 3-mana Drakes and Dragonauts to the cube, but the fact that this one draws you a card makes it much better. In a deck full of non-creature spells, you sometimes run the risk of turning on the removal that was rotting in your opponent's hand when you finally do cast a creature, and that virtual card disadvantage is nicely offset by the fact that Crackling Drake replaces itself. Expansion Explosion is, I think, a very cool card. I completely overlooked the card at first until one of the cube regulars pointed it out to me, and it's been powerful, flexible, and also very fun. Both halves are exciting when they are good, and this is probably my favorite addition from Guilds of Ravnica to the cube. Iron Eyes is just an expensive counterspell with minor upside, and will not remain in the cube when it goes back to the normal number of multicolor cards. Well, that is it for Izzet. Now let's have a look at Boros. For Boros, the Guilds of Ravnica cards I decided to add were Aurelia, Exemplar of Justice, Justice Strike, Integrity Intervention, and Tajik Legion's Edge. Tajik is okay for Boros aggro decks, but it is one of those cards that I added mainly because I just wanted to include lots of new cards. Both red and white aggro in my cube lend themselves better to be monocolored, maybe with a light splash, than to be full on Boros. And the reasons for that are that having the right mana for your 1-drops is crucial in those decks, and the best white 2-drops, and to a lesser extent the best red 2-drops, all have double colors in their mana cost. This just narrows down the decks where Tajik can really be played on curve, and it's probably not a mainstay for that reason. Justice Strike is much more likely to stay in the cube. Red often has problems dealing with creatures with high toughness, but Justice Strike can be hard removal against the biggest of fatties, as long as their toughness isn't higher than their power. Justice Strike is also an okay splash in aggro decks because it doesn't need to be played on curve, and unlike Tajik, it's also good in mid-range and control decks, which makes it a pretty versatile card. Less of a versatile card is Integrity Intervention, but it has the upside of being a multicolor aggro card that can also be played in a mono-color deck in a pinch. When you draft mono red or mono white, it's sometimes just hard to get enough playables, and because of that I like having some hybrid cards in those colors that can be played in either deck. Integrity, of course, isn't a great card at all, but sometimes you just need a 24th playable for your deck, and this can be it. If you're playing this as a splash in either color, then suddenly the added versatility that the combat trick gives you makes it maybe worth paying a little bit more for what is essentially a lightning helix, the intervention half of the card. Last up, Aurelia is just a powerhouse. She has cool art, lots of abilities, she's big and has an immediate impact on the board, and on top of that she is easy to cast. Because of all of that, she's a card that I'll be happy to keep in the cube for the foreseeable future at least. So that is all for Boros. Next up is Dimir. Notion Rain is a fine but very unimpressive card. The power level of my cube is simply a bit too high for this one, but even in a cube of slightly lower power, I think you want the effects of your multicolor cards to be more special than this and feel less like they might also have been monocolored cards. By contrast, Thief of Sanity is definitely the bee's knees. A 2-2 isn't very resilient to removal of course, but if you can attack with this a few times, you're probably going to win, and in a filthy way at that. Some shifty people just love nothing more than playing with their opponent's cards, so this is a real treat for those Ashiok and Nightfall Spectre enthusiasts out there. Thought Erasure is another card that feels like it might be monocolored, but unrestricted discard effects are not very common, and I rather like having another one of those in the cube, especially one that doesn't get snatched up by every black player at the table. I like Lazaf for how open-ended he is. With a lot of utility creatures in your deck, he can be any one of those that just happen to die or end up in your graveyard in some other way, and he can even become multiple different creatures in the same turn. If you have some creature combo in your deck, this becomes an excellent redundant combo piece, and in the late game, Lazaf becomes a great mana sink that can impersonate the best creature your opponent just managed to get rid of. Cards that cost only 2 mana and that can play a multitude of different and interesting roles depending on the phase and state of the game are just hard to find, and Lazaf is definitely one that I've enjoyed seeing in action. Well, those were the additions for Dimir, and the last guild we'll look at in this episode is Selesnya. In a cube full of powerful artifacts and enchantments, it's great to have some flexible answers that are main deck playable. A Knight of Autumn fits that bill perfectly, since when you don't have a valuable target to blow up, chances are you might be interested in some life gain or just want to add a 4/3 to the board. March of the Multitudes is a card that at first I wasn't sure about adding to the cube. It's of course at its best when you have lots of other token makers, so that you can use those tokens to convoke this out for even more tokens. And it also hints at a token theme being a thing in the cube, and I want to avoid having cards that point towards a strategy that isn't really available. So I went through my cube and I realized that green, and especially white, already had quite a few incidental token makers, and so I just increased that number a tiny bit more to get a critical mass, and then suddenly March of the Multitudes became a great addition. Amara, Soul of the Accord, was one of those additional token makers I mentioned. That also works nicely with Convoke, so with March of the Multitude she forms a little package deal. Amara itself is really nothing special though, so when Selesnya goes down to fewer multicolor cards again, she'll probably end up back in my bulk rare binder. I'm not sure what to think about Trostani Discordant. She looks better than she actually is, I think, and I'm not sure if she's powerful or interesting enough to stay in the cube for long. Having a so-called anthem effect attached to a creature that brings its own team is appealing though, and the token deck that I keep mentioning should be happy with this card. Well, that is it for Celestia, and that is also all for this first episode of MTG CubeTube. If you enjoyed this, please feel free to subscribe and you'll be notified when the next episode goes up, in which I will talk about the Golgari and monocolored cards from Guilds of Ravnica that I added to my cube. Feel free to leave comments in the comments section or to find me on Facebook or some other channel for feedback or questions. Thanks for watching this, and I hope to see you again for the next episode.